China had the potential of seeing whatever positive things it's trying to do with its soft power initiatives, which include creating things like Confucius Institutes on campuses around the world and trying to put a softer image forward. It would have been significantly damaged if they had used harsh methods to demand the return of Chen or imprison him or continue to do tough things to his family. But they chose a mixed bag where they are still Chinese security forces. They're what they are. They do things that are not very nice. But the public image of China, where the foreign ministry got involved and the leadership got involved, was to try to be accommodating and to treat Mr. Chen, who is not being charged with any crimes in China, as an ordinary citizen, and allow him to freely go to hospital, freely go abroad to study. So far, it has not had a negative effect. We had a rather productive strategic and economic dialogue in the immediate aftermath of this affair. Longer term, it's harder to tell because here we have, in the short space of a few months, two American diplomatic institutions involved in things which are, from the Chinese point of view, their domestic politics. And some of the things that were done at the American embassy are questionable, even though they were done in the spirit of trying to help someone who needed help. Very humanitarian and understandable effort. But in international behavior, there sometimes is a price to pay if you violate the rules. China thus far has not, to my knowledge, imposed a price on the U.S. Embassy. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were people in the Chinese system who were sharpening their knives to go at this. We had, in the aftermath of the Bo Xilai fall from power in Sichuan and in Chongqing province, now its own province, we had a situation where the U.S. was involved on a very consequential matter in Chinese high politics. And then this Chen Guangcheng affair, the U.S. Embassy got involved in what is a matter of more low politics, but of high tension in the Chinese leadership. And so I could see where people who were losing in recent battles might want to pick up an American stick and beat their opponents with it. It's not happening now. All the evidence is running the other way, but China often doesn't show you what's really going on until sometime later, when the surface becomes more open. Well, Bo Xilai, when he was party secretary of Chongqing, pursued policies that were out of step with the leadership. And one thing China likes is to have people be in step, not out of step. Some of his solutions, very expensive solutions to social inequality, to promoting growth in his province, were controversial, to say the least, and his harking back to Cultural Revolution themes in some cases stirred patriotism, in other cases it stirred deep fears of returning to bad old days. And he was pushing in a kind of an American-style political campaign to insert himself in the top leadership. Whereas I say they like to stay in step. They don't like people who march to a different drummer. And he gave them the opportunity through his reported misdeeds, to push him out. But pushing him out affects the complicated balance of interest groups in the Chinese leadership, which thus far have sort of stabilized in a newly institutionalized way. It's both highly personal and highly institutionalized around several former and current leaders. And that balance has been upset. I think it could. A lot of outside investors and punters on the economy would be concerned if they saw the system, which seemed to be getting institutionalized over the last 15 years, start to lose that institutional quality and therefore become more unpredictable. That may be behind why the Chinese have, in the last couple of weeks, been extraordinarily pliant and pragmatic in dealing with things that have been very neuralgic for them to deal with in the past, from Taiwan arms sales to dissidents to involvement in their internal politics. So they may not they may be so concerned not to show the outside world or their own people that there are differences, that they're accommodating us in the short term. If that's true, then it's going to be very hard to keep this volcano from blowing up at some point. That could very well happen, as it did in 1989 when the streets filled in several cities in China with millions of protesters. The leaders know that. They don't want to send a signal that there's a division that people can exploit. The U.S. and China have been in a discussion since late 2010 about how to handle each other's relations through the transition of a very politically sensitive year, both in the U.S. and in China this year. And they've been giving each other reassurances at the top levels. The National Security Advisor calls his counterpart, the Secretary of State calls her counterpart, and they stay in touch. And the leaders have met quite a few times, 11 times I believe is the number, between Hu Jintao and Barack Obama. And so they've been able to reassure each other that there are boundaries within which we will try to maintain the relationship, but keep the politics which exist in each side from breaching the jetties on the side of the stream. We've had it. Obama has talked about Chinese trade practices and currency practices very publicly, but he hasn't carried it into a kind of campaign against China, and China raises its concerns for the purposes of discussing them with their own people, but they haven't let this breach the banks. The Chen Guangcheng case, the good news is the man had no charges against him. If there were charges against him, this might have been harder for the Chinese government to resolve, because that gave them a platform from which to say, okay, we can do business in a normal way over this Chinese citizen. The new media in China are fantastically efficient. There are over 300, I think closer to 500 million internet users in China now. And a lot of them get on these micro-blogs and talk about issues that are sensitive, and when the great wall of censorship is imposed on them so that they can't mention specific names or specific towns or actions, they find homonyms and workarounds so that people are communicating constantly about issues that were unthinkably sensitive just a few years ago. The Chinese government now has had to be more responsive to what it sees as public opinion by observing the internet traffic and the proliferation of ordinary television, radio, and print media as well beyond what it used to be. And these places are all searching for market share, and therefore they tend to run to the extreme in telling their stories, and that puts even more pressure on officials to show backbone against the Americans, for example, or to be exposed for putting unnecessary pressures on some people like Chen Guangcheng, who is being brutalized by local authorities without authority from the center. Reform has been stopped. Both political and financial and economic reform has stopped for some time now, and in some respects is going backward. They have to get financial and economic reform going. In the long run, they will have to get political reform going as well, although they can probably get away with postponing that a little longer. But public taste for change is coming. They're demanding it. With the Bo Xilai affair, there's a possibility that there's been a shift in the momentum of the reformers who've been trying to push reform but have been unable to achieve consensus in the Politburo Standing Committee, where the top 9 leaders meet. It's possible now that if it goes to 7 leaders, there might be a more reform-minded group that would restart some of the stalled economic and financial reforms, and we can always hope that they'll try to begin the gradual introduction of political reforms as well. But that's still an unanswered question. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not.